The first bullet whistled past Vivian Turner's cheek, close enough that she felt the air disturb her loose auburn hair as she ducked behind the overturned stagecoach. The year was 1876, and what was supposed to be a simple journey to San Francisco had turned into a nightmare on the dusty trail just outside of Knights Ferry, California. "Stay down, miss." The driver's voice was strained as he clutched his bloodied arm. Two other passengers, an elderly couple, huddled beside her, the woman whimpering quietly as her husband held her close. Vivian's heart hammered against her ribs as another shot rang out, splintering wood just inches from her head. The bandits had appeared seemingly from nowhere, their faces obscured by bandanas, their intentions clear as they demanded valuables from the travelers. "Your money or your lives," one of them shouted, his voice carrying across the open terrain. Vivian clutched her small velvet purse, the only thing of value she possessed beyond the simple dress on her back and the locket around her neck. Inside the purse were the meager remains of her inheritance, barely enough to start a new life after the fire had claimed her family home back east, along with her parents. "I ain't asking again." The bandit's voice grew closer. The stagecoach driver reached for his shotgun but cried out as the movement aggravated his wound. Vivian knew in that moment they had no defense. "Please," she said, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her own heart. "We have little to give." A horse snorted nearby, followed by the crunch of boots on dry earth. Vivian closed her eyes, preparing for whatever would come next. Instead, a new voice cut through the tension, steady, commanding, with a hint of southern drawl. "I believe the lady asked you politely to move on." Vivian dared to peek around the edge of the overturned coach. A tall figure sat atop a magnificent chestnut stallion. The sun at his back cast his face in shadow, but she could make out the shape of a wide-brimmed hat and the glint of something metallic on his chest, a star. "This ain't your business, lawman," snarled one of the bandits. "I'm making it my business." The newcomer's voice remained calm as he dismounted, his hand resting casually on the holstered revolver at his hip. "3 men robbing a stagecoach in broad daylight. That's mighty foolish." "There's one of you and 3 of us," another bandit growled. The lawman tilted his head slightly. "I count 3 targets and 6 bullets in my gun. Those odds favor me, I reckon." Something in his tone, the absolute certainty, caused one of the bandits to shift nervously. "Now," the lawman continued, "you boys can ride away now, or you can try your luck. Either way, those folks are keeping what's theirs." A tense moment passed. Then the lead bandit spat in the dust. "This ain't worth dying over. Come on, boys." With reluctant curses, the bandits mounted their horses and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Only when they were specks on the horizon did Vivian release the breath she'd been holding. The lawman approached the overturned coach, and now she could see him clearly. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and wind but still handsome, with sharp blue eyes and a strong jaw shadowed by stubble. His badge identified him as a sheriff. "Everyone all right?" he asked, helping the elderly woman to her feet. "The driver's been shot," Vivian said, finding her voice. The lawman nodded, examining the driver's wound. "Flesh wound. He'll live, but we need to get him to town." He turned to Vivian, his gaze assessing her with a quick, professional glance. "You're not from around here." "No," she admitted. "I was headed to San Francisco." "Well, Miss Turner, Vivian Turner, Miss Turner, I'm Sheriff Jackson Irwin. Knights Ferry is just a few miles ahead. We'll need to get this coach upright and get you all to town for the night." With the sheriff's help, they managed to right the stagecoach, though one wheel had been damaged in the attack. The elderly couple, the Andersons, were placed inside, along with the injured driver. Sheriff Irwin offered Vivian a seat on his horse. "I can walk," she protested weakly. 3 miles in those shoes. He glanced down at her impractical Eastern footwear with a hint of amusement. "I'd rather not have to carry you when you collapse from heat and exhaustion." Reluctantly, she accepted his hand and was lifted onto the saddle in front of him. He led the horse with one hand on the reins, the other respectfully at her waist to keep her steady, while he walked alongside. "What brings a lady like you all the way from the East to California?" he asked after they had been walking for some time. Vivian hesitated. "A new beginning," she finally said. "There's nothing left for me back home." Something in her tone must have revealed more than she intended, for his grip on her waist steadied slightly, a small gesture of comfort. "Knights Ferry isn't San Francisco," he said, "but it's a good place. Honest folk for the most part. Except for the bandits," he chuckled, the sound warm against her back. "They're not locals, just passing through like you." "But unlike me, they're not seeking a new beginning," she observed. "No, madam. They're running from an old ending, usually one involving a jail cell." As they crested a small hill, Knights Ferry came into view, a small but thriving town nestled along the Stanislaus River. The main street bustled with afternoon activity shoppers, workers, and the occasional horse-drawn wagon. The sight of it, so alive and ordinary after their harrowing experience, brought an unexpected lump to Vivian's throat. "First things first," Sheriff Irwin said as they entered town. "We'll get the doctor for your driver and find you a place to stay until the stage company can arrange new transportation." "I have very little money," Vivian admitted, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "Don't worry about that now." His voice was kind but left no room for argument. The doctor's office was their first stop. While the physician, a gruff but efficient man named Dr. Miller, attended to the driver's wound, Sheriff Irwin made arrangements with the Andersons, who had relatives in town they could stay with. "Now for you, Miss Turner," he said, turning to Vivian. "The boarding house has a spare room, but it won't be free." Vivian's heart sank as she opened her small purse, counting the few dollars she had left. "This is everything," she said, her voice catching despite her efforts to remain composed. "After paying for a room tonight, I'm not sure how I'll continue to San Francisco." "You have plans there?" he asked. "Family waiting," she shook her head. "No family, just hopes for work. I've trained as a teacher." Sheriff Irwin seemed to consider this for a moment. "Knights Ferry has been looking for a schoolteacher. Our last one left to get married 3 months ago." Hope flickered in Vivian's chest. "Are you suggesting I apply?" "I'm suggesting you consider it. The town council meets tomorrow. I could introduce you." As they walked toward the boarding house, a tidy 2-story building with white trim, and a small garden, Vivian felt the weight of her situation pressing down. Everything she had planned, the little security she thought she had, seemed to be slipping through her fingers. Mrs. Holloway, the boarding house proprietor, was a plump woman with kind eyes who looked Vivian up and down with open curiosity. "Another stagecoach robbery. That's the second this month," she tutted, glancing at Sheriff Irwin. "You need to do something about those bandits, Jackson." "Working on it, Margaret," he replied with an easy familiarity. "Miss Turner needs a room for at least tonight, possibly longer." Mrs. Holloway named her price, and Vivian's hand trembled slightly as she counted out the money. It was most of what she had left. "Will you be taking your meals here too, dear?" the woman asked. Vivian hesitated, doing the mental calculation. "I am not sure I can afford. Miss Turner has been through quite an ordeal," Sheriff Irwin interrupted. "I'm sure the town can extend its hospitality for a day or two until things are sorted." Mrs. Holloway's expression softened. "Of course. Supper's at 6, dear. You're welcome to join us." After being shown to a small but clean room, Vivian sat on the edge of the bed, her composure finally crumbling. The events of the day, the robbery, the uncertainty of her future overwhelmed her. Tears slid silently down her cheeks as she clutched her locket, the last memento of her mother. A soft knock at the door startled her. She quickly wiped her eyes before opening it to find Sheriff Irwin standing there, hat in hand. "I wanted to check that you're settling in," he said, his gaze immediately noting her reddened eyes despite her efforts to hide them. "Yes, thank you," she managed. "You've been very kind." He hesitated, then said, "Miss Turner, I hope you don't find me forward, but is there anything else you need?" The simple question, asked with genuine concern, nearly undid her again. Her voice shook when she finally spoke. "I have nothing, Sheriff. Nothing at all." The cowboy's smile was gentle as he replied, "Now you have me, Miss Turner, and that's a start." Something in his steady gaze, in the quiet confidence of his words, steadied her. He wasn't offering charity or pity, he was offering alliance, and perhaps even friendship. "Thank you," she whispered, meaning it more deeply than those simple words could convey. "Rest," he advised. "Tomorrow we'll speak to the town council about the teaching position." He tipped his hat and turned to leave, then paused. "Knights Ferry might not be what you were heading for, Miss Turner, but sometimes the detours in life take us exactly where we need to be." As he walked away, Vivian felt something she hadn't experienced since before the fire: hope. The boarding house dining room buzzed with conversation at supper time. Mrs. Holloway had seated Vivian between herself and a cheerful young woman named Rachel, who worked at the general store. "So you're from back east?" Rachel asked, passing Vivian a basket of freshly baked rolls. "I've always wanted to visit New York. Is it as grand as they say?" "Parts of it are," Vivian replied, grateful for the distraction of casual conversation. "But it can be overwhelming too." "Not like Knights Ferry," Mrs. Holloway chimed in. "We're small but tight-knit. Everyone looks out for one another here." As if to illustrate her point, the dining room door opened, and Sheriff Irwin entered, looking freshly washed and changed from his dusty trail clothes. He nodded politely to the room before taking an empty seat across from Vivian. "Evening, ladies," he said. "Miss Turner, I trust you've rested?" "Yes, thank you," she replied, suddenly conscious of her own appearance. She had washed her face and hands but was still wearing her travel-worn dress. "Jackson, Mrs. Holloway said. Did you speak to Harold about the town council meeting?" The sheriff nodded, accepting a plate of roast beef and potatoes. "Meeting's set for 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. I've mentioned Miss Turner's qualifications." Rachel's eyes widened. "Are you staying to be our new teacher?" "Oh, that would be wonderful. The children have been running wild without proper schooling." "I haven't been offered the position yet," Vivian reminded her. "But you're interested?" Mrs. Holloway pressed. Vivian considered the question. She had been so focused on reaching San Francisco, on the plan she had carefully constructed after the fire, that staying in Knights Ferry hadn't been a consideration. Yet here she was, with limited funds and an unexpected opportunity. "Yes," she decided aloud. "I am interested." Sheriff Irwin's eyes met hers across the table, and the approval she saw there warmed her. After supper, while the other boarders retired to the parlor for coffee, Sheriff Irwin asked if Vivian would join him for a short walk. "It might help to know a bit more about the town before tomorrow's meeting," he explained. The evening air was cool and pleasant after the heat of the day. Main Street was quieter now, though light and piano music spilled from the saloon, and a few shopkeepers were closing up for the night. "Knights Ferry began as a mining town," Sheriff Irwin explained as they walked, "but it's evolved. We've got ranching, farming, and enough trade coming through to keep the town prosperous. Most folks are decent, hard-working people." "And the not-so-decent ones?" Vivian asked. He smiled slightly. Every town has its share of trouble. That's why they pay me." He nodded to a building ahead, a small schoolhouse set back from the road, with a bell tower and freshly painted white clapboard walls. "This would be your domain if you're hired." Vivian felt a flutter of excitement as they approached. "It's charming. About 30 children attend, ages 6 to 16. The older ones come when they can be spared from farm work." Inside, the schoolhouse was simple but well-maintained. Rows of desks facing a larger teacher's desk, a blackboard spanning one wall, and bookshelves filled with well-worn volumes. "The town takes education seriously," Sheriff Irwin said, watching as Vivian ran her fingers along the spines of the books. "These were donated by families or purchased with town funds." "It's more than I expected," she admitted. In her experience, frontier towns often prioritized practicality over education. "Knights Ferry isn't just some rough outpost, Miss Turner. We're building something lasting here." There was pride in his voice that spoke of deep investment in the community. "How long have you been sheriff?" she asked. 5 years. Came here after the war." He didn't elaborate on which side he had fought for, and Vivian didn't ask. The war between the states had ended 11 years ago, but its shadows still lingered across the nation. As they left the schoolhouse, Vivian paused to look up at the night sky. Away from the city lights she had known all her life, the stars were breathtaking, countless pinpricks of light in the vast darkness. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "One of the benefits of our little corner of the world," Sheriff Irwin agreed, his voice equally soft. For a moment, they stood in companionable silence, the weight of the day's events temporarily lifted. A shout from the direction of the saloon broke the spell. Sheriff Irwin's posture immediately changed, becoming alert and professional once more. "I should see to that," he said. "Permit me to escort you back to the boarding house first." "I can find my way," Vivian assured him. "It's just down the street. You should attend to your duties." He hesitated, clearly torn between chivalry and responsibility. "I'll be fine," she insisted with a small smile. "Thank you for showing me the school." With a reluctant nod, he tipped his hat. "Until tomorrow, then. The meeting is at the town hall, the brick building beside the general store." Vivian watched him stride purposefully toward the saloon before turning back toward the boarding house. The events of the day had left her exhausted, but her mind was too full for sleep. Instead, she found herself on the small porch at the rear of the boarding house, a shawl borrowed from Mrs. Holloway wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. "Couldn't sleep," the voice startled her. Rachel stood in the doorway, a cup of tea in her hands. "Too much to think about," Vivian admitted. Rachel joined her, sitting on the porch swing. "I came west 5 years ago," she offered. "My father died in the war, and my mother remarried a man who didn't want another man's daughter in his house." "I'm sorry," Vivian said, recognizing the pain beneath the matter-of-fact delivery. Rachel shrugged. "It worked out. My aunt owned the general store here. When she passed last year, she left it to me." She studied Vivian. "What really brings you west, if you don't mind my asking?" Vivian hesitated, then decided there was little point in keeping her circumstances secret. "A fire," she said simply. "Our home in New York, my parents. Everything gone in one night. I was away, visiting a friend. When I returned, there was nothing left but ashes." Rachel reached out to squeeze her hand. "That's terrible. The insurance money barely covered the debts and funeral expenses. I sold what few possessions remained and bought a ticket west. I'd heard San Francisco needed teachers, and I thought, a fresh start, as far from the memories as possible." "And now you're here instead," Rachel mused. "A detour," Vivian said, remembering Sheriff Irwin's words. "He likes you, you know," Rachel said, changing subjects with a directness that was both startling and refreshing. "The sheriff. He's simply being kind to a stranger in need." Rachel's laugh was warm and knowing. "Jackson Irwin is fair and honorable to everyone, but he doesn't personally escort every visitor around town or arrange emergency council meetings on their behalf." Vivian felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You're reading too much into simple courtesy." "Maybe," Rachel conceded, rising from the swing. "But I've known Jackson for 5 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you across the dinner table tonight." She headed toward the door, then turned back with a smile. "Just something to add to all those thoughts keeping you awake." Alone again, Vivian found her mind even more crowded than before. Sheriff Irwin was handsome, certainly, and there had been moments when something in his gaze had caused her heart to beat faster. But she had just arrived, still reeling from loss and uncertain of her future. Romance was the furthest thing from her practical plans. Still, as she finally retired to her room, she couldn't help but remember the warmth of his hand at her waist as they had ridden into town, and the quiet confidence in his voice when he had promised, "Now you have me." Morning brought clear skies and renewed determination. Vivian woke early, washing with the basin of water Mrs. Holloway had provided and changing into her one other dress, a simple blue cotton that had fared better during travel than the brown one she'd worn yesterday. At breakfast, Mrs. Holloway presented her with a small parcel. "A bit of ribbon for your hair, dear," she said. "First impressions matter with the council." Touched by the thoughtfulness, Vivian accepted the gift and carefully arranged her hair, securing it with the blue ribbon that matched her dress perfectly. "You look lovely," Rachel assured her when they met in the hallway. "Very teacherly, but not severe." The town hall was already busy when Vivian arrived. Sheriff Irwin stood outside, engaged in conversation with a well-dressed man who must have been in his 60s. "Miss Turner," the sheriff greeted her, his eyes taking in her appearance with obvious appreciation. "May I present Mayor Harold Burton? Mayor, this is Miss Vivian Turner." "The potential school teacher," Mayor Burton said, extending his hand. "Jackson speaks highly of your qualifications, young lady." "Thank you for considering me on such short notice," Vivian replied, keeping her voice steady despite her nerves. Inside, the town council comprised of the mayor, the local banker, the minister, and 2 prominent business owners sat at a long table. Several other townspeople filled seats at the back, clearly interested in the proceedings. Vivian answered their questions about her education, her teaching experience, limited but earnest, assisting at her own school after graduation, and her approach to discipline and curriculum. "Why should we hire someone who was merely passing through?" asked Mr. Fleming, the banker, his expression skeptical. "How do we know you won't leave at the first better opportunity?" It was a fair question, one Vivian had asked herself during the sleepless hours of the night. "I came west seeking a new beginning," she said honestly. "I had thought San Francisco would be that beginning, but perhaps I was mistaken. What I see in Knights Ferry is a community that values education and looks out for its members. I would be honored to be part of that, to contribute my skills and energy to shaping the minds of your children." From the back of the room, Sheriff Irwin caught her eye and gave a small nod of encouragement. After further discussion, Mayor Burton cleared his throat. "The position pays $40 a month, with room and board provided in the small cottage behind the schoolhouse. The term begins in 2 weeks, giving you time to prepare. Is this acceptable, Miss Turner?" Relief and excitement flooded through her. "Yes, Mayor Burton, very acceptable." "Then welcome to Knights Ferry, Miss Turner, our new school teacher." A smattering of applause broke out, and several women immediately approached to introduce themselves as mothers of future pupils. Vivian accepted their congratulations with growing confidence, the reality of her new position beginning to sink in. When the crowd finally thinned, Sheriff Irwin approached. "Congratulations, Miss Turner. Thank you for your support," she said. "I might not have had this opportunity without your intervention." "You earned it on your own merits," he corrected. "I merely provided an introduction." He hesitated, then asked, "Would you allow me to show you to the teacher's cottage? It might need some attention before you move in." The cottage was indeed in need of care, dusty from disuse, with furniture covered in sheets and cupboards bare of essentials. But it was solidly built, with 2 small rooms, a functional kitchen, and a porch that faced west toward the setting sun. "It has potential," Vivian said, already envisioning how she might make it a home. "The last teacher was particular about her privacy," Sheriff Irwin explained as they examined the space. "But it's close enough to town that you needn't feel isolated." "It's perfect," Vivian decided. "A place of my own." Something in her tone must have revealed her deeper feelings, for Sheriff Irwin's expression softened. "Everyone deserves a place to belong, Miss Turner." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Vivian felt a connection that went beyond the circumstances of their meeting, something deeper, a recognition of kindred spirits despite their different backgrounds. The moment was broken by a knock at the open door. Rachel stood there, arms laden with parcels. "Mrs. Holloway sent cleaning supplies," she announced, "and I brought some essentials from the store, house-warming gifts." Soon, other women from town arrived, each bearing something for the new teacher's cottage: curtains, preserved foods, a handmade quilt, even a small pot of flowers for the windowsill. What might have been days of solitary work became a community effort, with women cleaning and organizing while sharing town gossip and advice. Sheriff Irwin excused himself to attend to his duties, but not before promising to return later to check on her progress. By afternoon, the cottage had been transformed. Windows sparkled, floors shone, and the rooms felt welcoming rather than abandoned. "You'll stay at the boarding house until term starts," Mrs. Holloway insisted as the women prepared to leave. "No need to rush the move." Alone at last, Vivian sat on the porch steps, overcome by the day's events. In less than 48 hours, her life had changed completely from a woman with nothing but a desperate plan to a respected professional with a position, a home, and the beginnings of a community. And perhaps, whispered a small voice in her mind, the beginnings of something more. Sheriff Jackson Irwin found himself distracted as he made his afternoon rounds. His thoughts kept returning to the schoolhouse cottage and its new occupant. There was something about Vivian Turner that had captured his attention from the moment he had spotted the overturned stagecoach. It wasn't just her beauty, though she was certainly lovely with those expressive hazel eyes and that determined set to her chin. It was the quiet dignity she maintained despite her circumstances, the way she faced uncertainty with grace rather than self-pity. Knights Ferry had seen its share of settlers and drifters in the 5 years since Jackson had pinned on the sheriff's badge. Some stayed, finding a place in the growing community. Others moved on, seeking fortunes or futures elsewhere. Something told him Vivian Turner might be among those who stayed, who put down roots and helped the town grow, and if she did stay. Well, that was a trail of thought Jackson wasn't ready to follow just yet. His deputy, a young man named Thomas Riley, interrupted these reflections with news that the stage line had sent word. "Replacement coach arrives tomorrow noon," Riley reported. "Passengers continuing to San Francisco can board then." Jackson nodded. "Miss Turner won't be among them. She's accepted the teaching position." Riley grinned. "Figured as much, way you've been mooning over her. Town's been needing a teacher, something fierce." "I haven't been mooning," Jackson objected, though he felt his ears grow warm. Just doing my duty to a citizen in need." "Sure, Sheriff." Riley's grin widened. "Whatever you say." Ignoring his deputy's knowing look, Jackson completed his rounds before heading back toward the schoolhouse cottage. He told himself he was merely checking on the progress of the cleaning, ensuring the town's new teacher was properly settled. It had nothing to do with wanting to see Vivian again before the day ended. The cottage looked transformed when he arrived. Curtains hung in freshly cleaned windows, and the porch had been swept. Vivian sat on the steps, a thoughtful expression on her face as she gazed at the setting sun. She looked up at his approach, and the smile that lit her face caused a strange tightness in his chest. "Sheriff Irwin," she greeted him. "Come see what the ladies of Knights Ferry have accomplished." She led him through the cottage, pointing out the improvements with genuine delight. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Jackson found himself seeing the familiar space through new eyes. "It's going to be a fine home," he said when the tour concluded. "My first real home since the fire," she admitted softly. "I've been staying with friends, then traveling, nowhere to truly belong. Until now," he said. Their eyes met, and that same connection he had felt earlier sparked between them. In the golden light of late afternoon, with her hair slightly loosened from its pins and her cheeks flushed with excitement, Vivian Turner was the most beautiful woman Jackson had ever seen. He cleared his throat, suddenly aware that they were alone in the small cottage. "I should escort you back to the boarding house before dark," he said, propriety reasserting itself. "Of course." Was there a hint of disappointment in her voice, or was he imagining it? As they walked back toward town, Jackson found himself speaking of things he rarely discussed. His childhood in Tennessee, his service during the war, for the Union, though he mentioned this without emphasis. His decision to come west after peace was declared, seeking a fresh start away from the divided lands of his birth. "So you understand starting over," Vivian observed. "I do," he agreed. "It's not easy leaving everything familiar behind, but there's freedom in it too, the chance to define yourself by your own actions rather than by your past." "Is that why you became a sheriff?" To define yourself through service, Jackson considered this. "Partly," he admitted. "After seeing so much lawlessness during the war, I wanted to be part of building order. Knights Ferry gave me that chance." He glanced at her. "And now it's giving you a chance too." "Thanks to you," she said softly. "I only opened a door. You walked through it on your own merit." They reached the boarding house just as twilight deepened into evening. Jackson was suddenly reluctant for their conversation to end. "Would you?" He hesitated, then pushed forward. "Would you do me the honor of dining with me tomorrow evening to celebrate your new position?" Vivian's eyes widened slightly in surprise, but her smile was warm. "I would like that very much, Sheriff Irwin." "Jackson," he corrected. "If we're to be dining together, I think you can use my given name." "Jackson," she repeated, the word sounding different, special in her voice. "And I'm Vivian." "Good night, Vivian," he said, tipping his hat. "Until tomorrow." As he walked back to his small house near the jail, Jackson acknowledged to himself what he had been avoiding all day. He was deeply attracted to Vivian Turner. It wasn't just physical attraction, though that was certainly present. It was something more profound, a sense that she understood parts of him that others didn't see, that they shared something beyond their circumstances. It was too soon for such thoughts, he reminded himself. She had been in town barely 2 days. Yet something about her presence in Knights Ferry felt right, as if a space he hadn't known was empty had suddenly been filled. The following day brought renewed activity as the replacement stagecoach arrived. The Andersons and the now bandaged driver bid farewell to Vivian, expressing surprise and pleasure that she had found a position in Knights Ferry. "San Francisco's loss is our gain," Mrs. Anderson declared, patting Vivian's hand. Throughout the day, Vivian found herself both nervous and excited about her dinner with Jackson. It wasn't a formal courtship, she reminded herself. Simply a friendly meal to welcome her to town. Yet Rachel's knowing smiles and Mrs. Holloway's fussing over her appearance suggested the women of Knights Ferry viewed it as something more significant. "The blue dress again," Mrs. Holloway advised. "It brings out the gold in your eyes. And wear your hair down," Rachel added. "Well, partly down. You're still the schoolteacher, after all." By the time Jackson arrived to escort her to dinner, Vivian had changed her hairstyle 3 times, finally settling on a compromise. Hair pulled back from her face but falling in loose waves down her back, secured with Mrs. Holloway's ribbon. Jackson's appreciative glance when she opened the door suggested the effort had been worthwhile. He himself looked handsome in a clean white shirt and dark vest, his sheriff's badge polished and his usually unruly hair tamed. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you," she replied, feeling a blush warm her cheeks. "You're very handsome yourself." He offered his arm, and they walked to the hotel restaurant, the finest dining establishment in Knights Ferry, though still modest by Eastern standards. Heads turned as they entered, and Vivian was acutely aware that their dinner would be the subject of town gossip by morning. The meal was pleasant, the food surprisingly good. Jackson proved to be a thoughtful conversationalist, asking about her teaching plans and offering insights into the community she would be serving. "The Wilkins boys, there are 3 of them, are bright but restless," he advised. "Their father runs the largest ranch outside town, and they're more interested in riding than reading." "And the Miller twins," Vivian replied, recalling her conversations with the townswomen. "Inseparable and impossibly mischievous, according to their mother." "You've been doing your research," Jackson observed with approval. "A good teacher knows her pupils before the first lesson," Vivian said, then added with a small smile, "or at least tries to." As the evening progressed, their conversation shifted from professional matters to more personal ones. Jackson spoke of his dreams for Knights Ferry, not just maintaining order, but helping build a community where people could thrive. "The railroad will reach us eventually," he predicted. "When it does, Knights Ferry will grow. I want it to grow right, with schools and churches and laws that protect everyone, not just the powerful." "That's a noble vision," Vivian said, genuinely impressed by his perspective. "What about your vision?" he asked. "Beyond teaching here," Vivian considered the question. "I haven't thought that far ahead," she admitted. "After losing everything, I've been focused on rebuilding one day at a time." Jackson's hand covered hers on the table, his touch warm and reassuring. "There's wisdom in that, too." The simple gesture sent a flutter through Vivian's chest. His hand was calloused from work, yet his touch was gentle. When their eyes met across the table, she saw something in his gaze that both thrilled and frightened her interest, certainly, but also a depth of feeling that seemed premature given how little time they had known each other. Yet hadn't she felt it too? That immediate connection, that sense of recognition that defied rational explanation. After dinner, Jackson suggested a short walk before returning to the boarding house. The night was clear, stars spreading across the sky in breathtaking profusion. "I never tire of this view," Jackson said, following her gaze upward. "In the city, you forget how vast the sky really is. It makes one feel small," Vivian mused, but not in a frightening way, more like being part of something infinite. Jackson's smile in the moonlight was warm. "Exactly." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the sounds of the town piano music from the saloon, distant laughter, the occasional whinny of a horse creating a backdrop to their private bubble of companionship. "I want to thank you," Vivian said suddenly. Not just for dinner, but for everything since the stagecoach. You've shown me such kindness." "It's been my pleasure," Jackson replied, his voice low. "Truly." They had stopped walking, standing face to face in a pool of moonlight. The moment stretched between them, laden with possibility. Slowly, giving her every chance to step away, Jackson leaned down. His lips met hers in a kiss so gentle it was almost reverent, a question rather than a demand. Vivian answered by stepping closer, her hand rising to rest against his chest. The kiss deepened, becoming something more profound than either had anticipated. When they finally parted, both were breathing quickly, surprised by the intensity of their connection. "I should take you back," Jackson said, his voice husky. Vivian nodded, not trusting herself to speak. He offered his arm again, and they walked in charged silence back to the boarding house. At the door, he took her hand, pressing a kiss to her knuckles in a gesture that was both old-fashioned and deeply moving. "Good night, Vivian," he said. "May I call on you again?" "Yes," she whispered, finding her voice at last. "I would like that very much, Jackson." As she prepared for bed that night, Vivian's mind whirled with contradictory emotions. Everything was happening so quickly: the teaching position, the cottage, and now this undeniable attraction to Jackson Irwin. Part of her counseled caution, reminding her that she had come west to rebuild her life independently, not to leap into a relationship. Yet another part recognized that connections like the one she felt with Jackson were rare. There was an honesty between them, a natural understanding that couldn't be manufactured or forced. Sleep came eventually, bringing dreams of a future she had not dared to imagine. A life in Knights Ferry, teaching children by day and coming home to warm eyes and strong arms by night. The following 2 weeks passed in a flurry of preparation. During the day, Vivian readied the schoolhouse for the new term, organizing books, planning lessons, and meeting with parents who brought their children to introduce themselves to the new teacher. The evenings often found her in Jackson's company, sometimes dining together, sometimes simply walking through town or sitting on her cottage porch as she shared her plans for the school. Their courtship, for that was what it had become, despite its unconventional beginnings, progressed with a natural ease that surprised them both. Each conversation revealed new common ground, new reasons to admire one another. Jackson's steady strength complemented Vivian's quick intelligence. Her compassion matched his sense of justice. There were kisses, each more meaningful than the last, and tender moments of discovery. But they were both aware of Vivian's position as the town's teacher, a role that demanded propriety and respect. Their growing relationship remained proper, if increasingly affectionate. The day before the school term was to begin, Jackson arrived at the cottage with a small package. "A gift," he explained, "for your first day of teaching." Inside was a beautiful fountain pen, its barrel inlaid with mother-of-pearl. "Jackson, it's exquisite," Vivian breathed, turning it in the light. "Every teacher needs a good pen," he said with a smile. "And I wanted you to have something special to mark the occasion." Touched by his thoughtfulness, Vivian impulsively rose on tiptoes to kiss him. What began as a gesture of gratitude quickly deepened into something more passionate. Jackson's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. "I'm falling in love with you," he murmured against her lips. "I know it's fast, perhaps too fast, but it's true all the same." Vivian pulled back just enough to see his face, to read the sincerity in his eyes. "I'm falling in love with you too," she admitted. "It terrifies me sometimes, how quickly you've become important to me." "We don't have to rush," he assured her, brushing a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. "We have time to let this grow naturally." Yet both knew that their feelings had already outpaced conventional timelines. There was a rightness to their connection that defied explanation, but couldn't be denied. The first day of school arrived bright and clear. 28 children, ranging from solemn 6-year-olds to gangly teenagers, filled the schoolhouse benches, eyeing their new teacher with varying degrees of curiosity and wariness. Vivian, dressed in her most professional attire and with her new pen prominently displayed on her desk, felt a flutter of nerves as she rang the bell to officially begin the term. "Good morning, children," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I am Miss Turner, and I am honored to be your teacher." By midday, she had learned all their names and begun to assess their various levels of education. The Wilkins boys were indeed as rambunctious as promised, but they showed a surprising aptitude for mathematics. The Miller twins finished each other's sentences and tried to switch places during the lunch break, a ploy Vivian gently thwarted with humor rather than scolding. When the final bell rang and the children scattered to their homes, Vivian sat at her desk, tired but deeply satisfied. This was what she had trained for, what she had hoped to find in San Francisco. Instead, she had found it here, in this small town that was increasingly feeling like home. A knock at the schoolhouse door roused her from her reflections. Jackson stood there, hat in hand, a bouquet of wildflowers in the other. "How was the first day?" he asked, presenting the flowers with a smile. "Wonderful," Vivian replied honestly. "Exhausting, but wonderful. The children behaved, mostly." She laughed, recounting some of the day's minor adventures. They walked together to the cottage, where Vivian placed the wildflowers in a jar of water on her small dining table. The simple domesticity of the moment, flowers from a bow, a home of her own, work that fulfilled her, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "Vivian," Jackson's voice was concerned. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," she assured him, wiping her eyes with embarrassment. "Just happiness, I think. I never expected to find this kind of contentment again, not after everything I lost." Understanding softened his expression. "Life has a way of surprising us," he said, drawing her into his arms. "Sometimes with sorrow, but sometimes with joy we never anticipated." Held against his solid chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, Vivian knew with sudden clarity that she had found more than a job or a home in Knights Ferry. She had found a future, one that included the strong, honorable man whose arms encircled her so protectively. The weeks that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Weekdays were filled with teaching, weekends with community activities, and increasingly open courtship. Jackson began taking Sunday dinners with Vivian at her cottage, a practice that raised eyebrows but was ultimately accepted given the sheriff's respected position and Vivian's impeccable behavior in all other respects. As autumn painted the surrounding hills with gold and crimson, their relationship deepened. They spoke of their pasts more freely, Jackson of his divided family during the war, some fighting for the South while he joined the Union. Vivian of her parents' expectations for her to marry well in New York society, expectations she had gently but firmly resisted in favor of education and independence. "They would have liked you," she told Jackson one evening as they sat on her porch watching the sunset. "My father valued honesty above all things. My mother admired competence. You have both in abundance." "And would they have approved of their educated daughter falling for a rough frontier lawman?" he asked, only half joking. "They would have approved of my happiness," Vivian said softly. "And you make me very happy, Jackson." His kiss was tender, a seal on her words. Later, as he prepared to leave, always at a proper hour, mindful of her reputation, he held her hands in his. "There's a harvest dance next Saturday," he said. "Would you do me the honor of attending as my partner?" "I would be delighted," Vivian replied, already imagining an evening of music and movement in his arms. The harvest dance was the social event of the season in Knights Ferry. Held in the town hall, decorated with autumn bounty and lit by dozens of lanterns, it brought together everyone from ranchers to shopkeepers, all celebrating the end of a successful harvest. Vivian wore her best dress, a dark green that complemented her auburn hair, and allowed Rachel to arrange her tresses in a more elaborate style than usual. When Jackson arrived to escort her, his appreciative gaze made her blush like a schoolgirl rather than the composed teacher she had become. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "And you're very handsome," she returned, admiring his formal attire, a crisp white shirt, black vest, and string tie that transformed the everyday sheriff into a dashing figure. The dance was already underway when they arrived. Fiddles and a piano provided lively music, and couples whirled around the floor with varying degrees of grace. Children darted between groups of adults, playing their own games until fatigue claimed them and they curled up on benches along the walls. Jackson led Vivian onto the dance floor for a waltz, his hand warm and secure at her waist. Though neither was particularly skilled, they moved together with natural harmony, as they did in so many aspects of their relationship. "Everyone's watching us," Vivian murmured, aware of the speculative glances from the townspeople. "Let them watch," Jackson replied with a smile. "We have nothing to hide." The evening progressed with dancing, refreshments, and conversation with various townspeople. Vivian found herself genuinely enjoying the sense of community, the feeling of belonging among these people who had so readily accepted her as their teacher, and, increasingly, as a permanent addition to their town. During a break in the dancing, while Jackson fetched them punch, Mayor Burton approached Vivian. "Miss Turner," he greeted her warmly, "the school board is extremely pleased with your work so far. The children speak highly of you, and several parents have commented on improvements in their studies." "Thank you, Mayor Burton," Vivian replied, genuinely touched by the praise. "I'm enjoying my position very much." The mayor glanced toward Jackson, who was making his way back through the crowd. "And I see you're enjoying other aspects of life in Knights Ferry as well," he observed with a knowing smile. Vivian felt her cheeks warm. "Sheriff Irwin has been very welcoming," she said diplomatically. Mayor Burton chuckled. "My dear, I've known Jackson since he first pinned on that badge. He's a good man, the best, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." He patted her hand paternally. "Knights Ferry would be fortunate indeed if our sheriff and our schoolteacher were to make a permanent alliance." Before Vivian could formulate a response to this rather direct hint, Jackson returned with their drinks, and Mayor Burton moved on with a wink that left Vivian both embarrassed and oddly pleased. The highlight of the evening came when the fiddler announced a special dance, one where partners would be separated and then find each other blindfolded, guided only by the sound of their names being called. "A silly tradition," Jackson explained as the women were led to one side of the room and blindfolded first, "but people enjoy it." Blindfolded, Vivian stood among the other women, listening as the men were positioned across the room and similarly blindfolded. At the fiddler's signal, the women began moving forward, calling their partners' names. "Jackson," Vivian called, feeling both foolish and exhilarated as she moved carefully through the darkness, hands extended before her. All around, other voices called other names, creating a cheerful cacophony. "Vivian," came Jackson's voice, somewhere to her left. She turned toward it, continuing to call his name as he called hers. Their hands found each other first, his strong fingers closing around hers with sure recognition. Then they were embracing, laughing as they removed their blindfolds to confirm what they already knew. They had found each other unerringly among the crowd. Something about the moment, the symbolism of finding each other, even when blind, the public acknowledgement of their connection seemed to shift their relationship into a new phase. Later that night, as they walked slowly back to Vivian's cottage beneath a canopy of stars, Jackson seemed unusually quiet. "Is everything all right?" Vivian asked, concerned by his thoughtful silence. He stopped walking, turning to face her. In the moonlight, his expression was serious but warm with emotion. "I've been thinking," he began, "about the future, about us." Vivian's heart quickened. "What about us?" "I love you, Vivian," he said simply. "These past months have shown me what I want for the rest of my life, and that's you beside me. As my wife, if you'll have me." Though she had begun to hope for this, the actual moment took her breath away. "Jackson." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. Inside was a ring, a delicate gold band set with a modest but perfect diamond. "It was my mother's," he explained. "I sent for it weeks ago, but it only arrived yesterday. I was planning a more elaborate proposal, but tonight, seeing you in that hall, finding each other in that silly game, it felt right." Vivian looked from the ring to his face, seeing all the love and hope she felt reflected in his eyes. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, Jackson, I will marry you." His smile was brilliant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if meant to be there all along. Then he was kissing her, lifting her off her feet in his enthusiasm, both of them laughing and crying at once. "When?" he asked when they finally broke apart. "How soon can you be my wife?" "Christmas," Vivian suggested. "It would give us time to prepare, and what better gift could there be?" "Christmas it is," Jackson agreed. He kissed her again, more gently this time. "I promise to make you happy, Vivian, to be the kind of husband you deserve." "You already make me happy," she assured him. "Every day since you rode up to that stagecoach, you've been bringing light back into my life." They walked the rest of the way to her cottage hand in hand, speaking of plans and dreams for their shared future. On the porch, their goodnight kiss held new meaning, a promise, a commitment, a future sealed between them. News of their engagement spread quickly through Knights Ferry. The following day, after church services, they were inundated with congratulations and well wishes from the townspeople. The women immediately began discussing wedding preparations, while the men slapped Jackson on the back and teased him good-naturedly about finally being caught. The weeks leading up to Christmas were a whirlwind of teaching, planning, and increasingly elaborate wedding preparations as the women of Knights Ferry took charge. Vivian found herself swept along, sometimes bemused by the enthusiasm of her new community, but grateful for their support. "You'd think they were all getting married," she remarked to Jackson one evening as they reviewed the growing guest list. "In a way they are," he replied thoughtfully. "A wedding like this, it's not just about us. It's about the town too, about putting down roots and growing together." Vivian was struck by the wisdom in his words. Their union symbolized something beyond their personal happiness. It represented stability, continuity, the building of something lasting in this frontier community. As Christmas approached, a new challenge arose. Vivian received a letter from her aunt in New York, her only remaining family, expressing regret that she could not travel such a distance for the wedding, but sending a generous gift and warm wishes. "I wish someone from my family could be there," Vivian admitted to Jackson, trying to hide her disappointment. "It seems wrong somehow to have no one from my past to witness this new beginning." Jackson considered this, then made a surprising suggestion. "What if we postponed the wedding until spring? It would give your aunt time to make arrangements for the journey." The offer touched Vivian deeply, that he would delay their marriage out of consideration for her feelings, but after reflection, she shook her head. "No," she decided. Christmas feels right. And besides, I do have family here now, not by blood but by choice. The people of Knights Ferry have become my family too." Jackson's smile was tender as he kissed her forehead. "Mine as well. And soon we'll begin our own family." The thought of children, perhaps a boy with Jackson's steady gaze or a girl with her own curious nature, filled Vivian with a warm anticipation. From loss had come renewal, from emptiness, fullness. The circle was completing itself. Christmas Eve dawned clear and cold, with a dusting of snow that transformed Knights Ferry into a scene from a holiday card. The church had been decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, and candles flickered in every window of the town. In Mrs. Holloway's best guest room, Vivian prepared for her wedding with the help of Rachel and several other women from town. Her dress, ivory silk with a modest train, had been a gift from the townswomen, each contributing what they could afford to ensure their teacher had a proper wedding gown. "Something borrowed," Mrs. Holloway said, pinning a cameo brooch to Vivian's bodice. "It was my grandmother's." "Something blue," Rachel added, presenting a delicate blue handkerchief embroidered with Vivian's new initials, V.I. "And something old," said Mrs. Miller, the mother of the twins, placing a lace veil on Vivian's carefully arranged hair. "My daughter wore it at her wedding and her daughter after her." Tears pricked Vivian's eyes at their kindness. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." When it was time, Mayor Burton himself arrived to escort her to the church. "Since your father cannot be here," he explained, offering his arm with old-world courtesy. The church bells were ringing as they approached, their joyful pealing echoing through the crisp air. Inside, every pew was filled not just with townspeople, but with ranchers and farmers from miles around, all gathered to witness the union of their sheriff and their teacher. And there at the altar stood Jackson, tall and handsome in a new suit, his face lighting with love and pride as Vivian appeared at the church door. The ceremony was simple but profound. They spoke their vows in clear, steady voices, promising to love and cherish each other through all the joys and sorrows life might bring. When Jackson slipped a gold band onto Vivian's finger to join her engagement ring, his hand trembled slightly, the only outward sign of the depth of emotion he felt. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared, beaming at the couple before him. "Sheriff Irwin, you may kiss your bride." Jackson's kiss was both tender and triumphant, a seal on their vows, a promise of the life they would build together. The reception that followed, held in the festively decorated town hall, was the most joyous celebration Knights Ferry had seen in years. There was feasting and dancing, speeches and toasts, laughter and a few sentimental tears. As midnight approached, Jackson led his bride away from the festivities toward the house that would now be their home, his modest but comfortable residence near the jail, expanded and refurbished in recent weeks to accommodate a family. On the porch, he paused, turning to Vivian with an expression of such love that it took her breath away. "Welcome home, Mrs. Irwin," he said softly. Then, in a gesture that made her laugh with delight, he swept her into his arms and carried her over the threshold into their new life together. The years that followed were not without challenges. Knights Ferry faced droughts and floods, the occasional outlaw gang, and the complexities of growth as the railroad indeed arrived, bringing new opportunities and new problems. Jackson continued as sheriff, his reputation for fairness and courage growing beyond the town's boundaries. Vivian taught for 2 more years before the birth of their first child, a son they named James, after Jackson's father. She later returned to teaching part-time, establishing adult education classes for those who had missed schooling in their youth. Their family grew to include a daughter, Elizabeth, born 3 years after James, and later another son, Thomas. Their home, expanded again to accommodate their growing family, became a center of community life, a place where townspeople gathered to discuss important matters, where children were always welcome, and where newcomers found hospitality and acceptance. Through it all, their love deepened and matured, weathering the inevitable storms of life with the same strength and grace that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. On their 10th anniversary, as they sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard, Jackson took Vivian's hand, his thumb brushing over the rings that had not left her finger since he placed them there. "Are you happy, my love?" he asked, a question he still posed regularly, as if her happiness remained his primary concern after all these years. Vivian looked at their children, at the thriving town beyond, and finally at the man beside her, still handsome, still steadfast, still the center of her world. "Completely," she answered truthfully. "Are you?" Jackson's smile was warm as he leaned in to kiss her. "How could I not be? You gave me everything I never knew I needed." Vivian leaned her head against his shoulder, remembering that day long ago when a stagecoach robbery had changed the course of her life. "No," she corrected softly. "You gave me everything when I had nothing." In the golden light of the setting sun, with the sounds of their children's laughter surrounding them, they sat together, not just survivors of past losses, but creators of a present filled with love and a future bright with promise. The stagecoach that had been meant to carry Vivian to San Francisco had brought her instead to her true destination: a life of purpose, community, and deep, abiding love. What had seemed a detour had been the correct path all along, leading her home to the place and the man that had been waiting for her, even before she knew to look for them.